Welcome to the fourth article in a series of faith development articles on prayer and the Eucharist, presented by the St. Patrick's Parish Faith Development Commission. The title of this article is How Jesus is Present in the Eucharist. In our previous article, The Eucharist as the Real Presence of Jesus, we asserted that in the case of sacred mysteries, we should not expect to understand how they work. However, that statement can be qualified by what has been revealed about the mystery through the tradition of practice and belief as known and interpreted by the inspired teaching authority of the Church. In the case of the Eucharist, that inspired teaching authority was invoked when the traditions of sacred beliefs and practices were contradicted. The result was a series of doctrinal definitions or teachings from formal bodies of the Church, such as synods and councils, that do explain some of how the Eucharist works, and that do provide fresh ground for theological reflection. The following is a summary list of those definitions and teachings. Number 1, Jesus is really physically present, not just symbolically or spiritually. Number 2, Jesus is present in his totality as a divine person, with both his human and divine natures present, as stated by the Council of Trent, in body, blood, soul, and divinity, under the appearances of both the consecrated bread and the consecrated wine. Number 3, Jesus is totally and really present in these two different forms to remind us of his death when his body and blood were separated at the time of his suffering and death. Number 4, Jesus is not multiplied in many hosts or through many masses, but the same one Jesus is present through the consecration of all masses in all Eucharistic species of bread and wine. Number 5, Jesus is not relocated from his presence in heaven, but he is in many other places present to us sacramentally in his own substance by a manner of existing that is possible to God. This statement was made by a decree of the Council of Trent, Session 13, Chapter 1. Number 6, Jesus remains present after the consecration of the Eucharistic species of bread and wine as long as their appearances last. Number 7, this remaining presence can and should be adored as a presence of God administered to those who are unable to attend Mass and kept in the tabernacle in Catholic churches as a focal point of prayer and God's presence for our worship. Number 8, after the consecration, only the appearances of bread and wine remain. The bread is no longer bread, and the wine is no longer wine, but rather Jesus himself. This consecration is described as transubstantiation, the change of one substantial reality into another. Number 9, the power and authority to perform the consecration of the bread and wine, transforming these Eucharistic elements into Jesus, is conferred through the sacrament of holy orders in the ordination to the priesthood. For the sacrament of holy orders to be valid, there must exist an unbroken line of authority from the apostles to the bishop conferring the ordination, referred to as the apostolic line. In other words, only validly ordained bishops who are in the line of apostolic succession validly confer the sacrament of holy orders. One of the most difficult but theologically rich teachings from the above list is item 5, declaring that Jesus is not relocated from his presence in heaven, but is present to us sacramentally by a manner of existing that is possible to God. In his book, The Hidden Manna, Father James O'Connor provides us with some theological reflection on this teaching, which can enrich our experience in receiving the Eucharist. Jesus does not come down from heaven to be present in the Eucharist. Rather, the Eucharist brings us to the living presence of Jesus through a mysterious window, connecting us to his eternal living reality with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Father O'Connor eloquently describes this process in the following excerpts. Quote, "The Eucharistic elements can be compared to a window on the invisible dimensions of the universe. Hidden by the veil, nearly transparent to the eyes of a living faith, having the appearances of earthly food, the heavenly banquet is present." And again, Father says, "By his power, then, as universal Lord, to attract all things to himself, Christ lifts the creaturely realities of bread and wine, draws them to himself, changes them into himself, leaving the appearance of the earthly realities as vehicles for the heavenly exchange by which he physically comes to us as our food, while drawing us to himself through and in the Eucharistic species. Having been, however, destructured of any real being of their own and preserved miraculously, the appearances of what were bread and wine mediate to all who touch them, receive them, worship before them, the person whose flesh and blood they contain, and whose reality their own former reality has become. It is only through the sacramental species that he is physically accessible at all on this side of the divide that separates the visible and invisible dimensions of creation, both of which already contain spiritual and material physical elements." End of quote from The Hidden Manna. When we receive the Eucharist, we are entering into a mysterious intersection of time and eternity, of spirit and matter. To the degree that we can grasp this with our minds and hearts, it is an event that should cause great awe and reverence. All that is expected, however, is a humble and open heart to receiving the love and presence of Jesus. Two other church teachings of great value regarding Christ's presence in the Eucharist, items number 6 and number 7 above, are that Jesus remains present in the bread and wine as long as those appearances last, and that the reserved Eucharist gives us the great privileges of being able to give Jesus in the Eucharist our continuing worship and to share the Eucharist with those who cannot attend Mass or may be in the process of dying and need the last sacraments, including the Eucharist referred to as viaticum. The primary reference and source of this article, written by Mike Moyer, is the book entitled The Hidden Manna by Father James T. O'Connor, which book has ecclesiastical approval. Please give us your feedback and evaluation of this article by completing the survey on the parish website.